So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll make a start. We're just a few minutes early, but that gives our guest speaker a little bit of latitude, and we'll forgive any latecomers. My name's Louise Kenny. I'm Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Faculty of Health and Life Sciences here at the University of Liverpool, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all this evening to this very special event. Before I introduce our inaugural lecturer this evening, I would just like to say a few words about inaugural lectures. They are, I think, as we were just discussing, the sort of academic equivalent of a wedding. It's the one time in your life where the audience is there by choice, not because they have to be, not because they've been invited, but because they want to be a part of what is a really special milestone in any academic's career. And it's probably one of the most enjoyable parts of my job. I get to give these introductions at a regular point through the academic year. And I think it's a really wonderful thing for the community to come together with interested members of the public, often the lecturer's family and friends, to celebrate the core business of what we do in universities. Especially now, when everything looks a little bit uncertain in the outside world. The stuff that we do here has never mattered more. And it's wonderful that on occasions like this, we can just take a beat to celebrate some of the fantastic science that is impacting lives nationally and internationally in this very special place. And that is a lovely introduction to tonight's inaugural lecture, which will be delivered, as you all know, by Prof. Paul Christiansen. So Paul first joined us here in the Department of Psychology in 2006, actually, as a master's student on the Addictive Behaviours course, and it's good to see so many people who were fundamental in establishing that course in the audience tonight. Paul had previously gained his degree in psychology from the University of Leeds, a sin for which he has long been forgiven. And after a stint in the NHS, it's fight and talk, Jason. After a stint as a research assistant in the NHS, he came back to do his PhD in the Department of Psychology, while also teaching research methods and statistics. Now, Paul's PhD actually focused on automatic cognitive processes in addiction, but he soon switched his attention to focus on methodology and statistics, and through that switch began to collaborate extensively with numerous researchers across the school, the institute, and the wider university community. Referencing a stellar career, he was appointed as a lecturer straight from his PhD in 2012, and then promoted to senior lecturer in 2018. Last year, he was appointed to a chair in applied statistics, and it's this appointment that we are here to celebrate this evening. As Paul will discuss, his research portfolio is incredibly varied, with a substantial contribution to not only addiction, but also appetite, forensic, clinical, and medical research. Much of his research has had substantial impacts beyond academia, and I think we may learn that that early exposure to the NHS was probably fundamental in thinking about why what we do here matters. As well as research, Paul's passionate about statistics education and has worked closely with SAGE to write books, online courses, and make video resources. This will be on YouTube, won't it, Paul, very shortly? So, his growing reputation meant that... tell us what the key for the paywall is. His growing reputation meant that he was recently asked to write an introduction to statistics by the British Psychological Society. And in addition, he does have a massive following on YouTube. You should check it out on your phones just now. He's got over 100 statistic video guides and with almost 1 million views. So that is really a substantial social media presence. So this evening he's going to talk about the research he's been involved in his somewhat atypical academic career, but above all, he promises that he is not going to bore us. Statistics are, in fact, really interesting. So having built him up, I'm going to exit stage left. Welcome, Paul. Enjoy.
Just give me half an hour. I'll get this on. There we go. So, I'm not going to talk to you a lot about statistics. There's one formula, and there's one multi-level negative binomial hurdle model in there. But that's it. That's the only real stats I'm going to talk to you about. But I really struggled with how to start this because I have a very weird academic career. Lots of people go, oh, I researched this area, and they talk about their research and how they developed it. I just do lots and lots and lots of different things, and it's quite a scattergun approach. So I was thinking about how to start this. Then I was thinking back to another inaugural lecture that I saw, and that was Professor Emma Boylan's inaugural lecture. And I don't know if anyone was here and saw that. She had the celebrity doctor, Chris Van Tullochen, did a little talk about how brilliant she is. So I thought, that's a good way to get something introduced.
This is just a message to say welcome to Professor Christiansen's inaugural lecture from the superior Van Tullochen.
Always start with the Van Tullochen. That's what I've learned over the years, and you can take that home with you and use it yourselves in the future. We WhatsApp, you know. But anyway, sex offenders, cannabis use, alcohol misuse, obesity, bowel disorders, fear of dentists, nefarious academic practice, anxiety, fear of sweeteners, magic mushrooms, terrorists, and junk food. But enough about you. We're here to talk about me. So here I am. Say one thing about my family. We own the 1980s. So I'm going to sort of talk to you about how that, obviously that's me. I don't know why I had to point that one out. The one that looks like me. I was like, how I came to be this terrible, embittered statistics person that stands before you today. So I'm sort of going to talk you through all the different things I've done and how I've ended up where I am. I first started off, after my undergraduate, I did my PhD while teaching stats here. And I looked at the role of automatic cognitive process in hazardous drinking, supervised by Professor Matt Field, who's now at Sheffield, Andrew Gowdy, who's now retired, and John Cole, who's still here. Then the latter just told me in all the meetings what my problem was. And if anyone's ever been in a meeting with John Cole, they know nothing's changed. So one of the things I looked at for 4 years was this concept of attentional bias. So in a nutshell, dopaminergic sensitization of the mesolimbic system, particularly the nucleus accumbens, as a result of continued drug use, leads to hypersensitivity to drug-related cues in the environment. Through classical conditioning, this means they grab, hold attention, and drive drug use. People who drink alcohol will look at alcohol stimuli. That's what that means. And the thing about that is, oh, by the way, if you're not familiar with 90s and early 2000s comedy, a lot of this ain't going to land. All right, so just bear that in mind. I'll get rid of that. I got upstaged by Alan Partridge. And that's what I was researching. I did my PhD in that. So it was 4 years. That's what I was looking at and spending a lot of time in the lab doing this research. And that's really what I was looking at. You know, do people who drink alcohol will look at alcohol stimuli? But does it do anything? Does that matter? You know, can we boil down drug dependence down and ignore all the complex social, economic, emotional and decision-making processes to, well, people are just going to look at alcohol and it's going to make them want to drink? Can we boil down dependence into something like that? Well, people believed you could and still believe this is one of the dominant theories of addiction today. And when I was doing my PhD, we had people, not here, particularly in the Netherlands, who were getting crack cocaine addicts in the laboratory, sitting them in front of a computer and training them to look away from pictures of crack cocaine to cure them. And people were doing that with alcohol as well. Right, to me, now, that doesn't pass a logic check. The basic logic check of, it ain't going to work. You're trying to undo 10, 20, 30 years of alcohol misuse by sitting someone in the lab and saying, don't look at the side, eh? It's not going to work. And what sort of really got me into thinking about methods and similar things a lot more was this training stuff and how badly they were doing it. So there's this paper here called Reversing the Sequence, Reducing Alcohol Consumption by Overcoming Attentional Bias. There you got a group of people in the lab, tested them, and everyone who was a hazardous drinker, they said, you're a hazardous drinker, do you want to do this cognitive training? We're going to train your attention and help you. So they got them in the lab. They did that training. A couple of weeks later, they tested them again. They drank less alcohol. Right? So this paper's like, look at that. It works. There's no control group. Right? Which is your basic tenets of fundamental doing some science. Put a control group in there. If you get somebody into a lab and you say to someone, you drink too much. Do you know what they're going to do? Decrease the drinking. Doesn't matter what you get them to look at. If people realise they're drinking too much, they're going to stop drinking a little bit. And that's all that study showed. But there's people, doing this. And this was their theory, their idea to solve, addiction over the years. And I got really annoyed. It caused me to, flounce out of addiction research. I don't know why I said flounce. I've never flounced in my life. Maybe. And that's not strictly true. I still do some addiction research. I just don't do this area whatsoever. But I did leave on a high point with a great pun in my paper, Less Than Meets the Eye, Reappraising the Clinical Relevance of Attentional Bias in Addiction. And that paper's cited about 500 times now. It's a very highly cited paper because it basically did a review of all the stuff, whether this attentional bias predicts things or whether it can be altered to cure things. It basically says, there's no evidence for this, stop it. This just doesn't work. All the studies that say they've got evidence are fundamentally flawed, whether they're statistically flawed or methodologically flawed. So, I got a last laugh on a lot of those people there as well. So I did pretty well on that. However, I started to get more and more involved at the time in appetite research because I was more interested, again, in the methods rather than the theory that underpinning things. I was more interested in methods. And actually, where this all started, and I was sitting next to Jason at the time, was a European Association study for obesity conference. I think we were in Prague. And I was sitting next to Jason, and we were watching this talk with these people, these neuroscientists, showing images of the brain when people were shown images of food. And they were going, see that bit of the brain lighting up? That's the bit of the brain that's activated by cocaine and heroin. Food's addictive. And I just remember sitting there in the audience getting really quite cross about this whole thing. And then, so on the back of that, Professors Jason Alvin and Charlotte Hardman, they organised a year later, we did a symposium about food addiction and the problems with this narrative that was starting to build. We seen all this food addiction stuff that's food addictive, which enabled me to do a talk to really annoy these people. Because you'll notice throughout this, I just like really annoying people. There I am doing the talk. Jason looked a lot happier to be there at the time. That's just a bad photo. And we see, I was talking about all these headlines we see in the press. Cheese really is crack. Study reveals cheese is as addictive as drugs. I actually emailed the person who wrote that and said, all right, I'll eat cheese every day. You smoke crack every day and we'll meet up in a year. Never heard back. You never do. You never do with these people. But this is the sort of point I was making is you're talking about, the bit of the brain lights up. So because I'm driven by sarcasm, I was sort of demonstrating other things that light these reward areas of the brain up. People you find attractive. Am I addicted to Natalie Portman? Maybe. Music that you like. I like country music. Country music will also activate. Am I addicted to country music? I have a 72-hour-long country music playlist, so yes. Vengeance. Watch a video of someone getting vengeance. That lights up reward areas of the brain. Are we addicted to vengeance? Facebook, remember that? We were addicted to Facebook for a while. Same as cocaine. George Bush. People who voted for George Bush had the reward area of the brain lit up by pictures of George Bush. Are we addicted to George Bush? Right now, we wish we were. So I sort of started, as I say, I got sort of more and more involved with appetite research over the years and started looking at lots of different appetite stuff. And a lot of work I've done recently is on looking at sweeteners. And I don't want to make Joe scared by mentioning the switch trial because we've been through enough with this. But so, for example, I've done trial statistics. I was the trial statistician for the switch trial, exploring the impact of non-nutritious sweeteners on weight loss and regain. So I worked on that with the initial protocol, went out to Colorado. Me and Jason went to Colorado to meet the team who conducted the original trial. There we are, working hard. You can tell by the blinds that was a classy restaurant. You know a restaurant's bad is when you get up to go and wait for your taxi outside, and the manager runs after you and goes, "No, you'll get shot." That actually happened that actually happened. But you know, we did this, and we did the trial. So as the trial started, I did all power calculation with the analysis protocols, etc., etc., etc. And we finally finished the switch trial the other year. Went through COVID, all sorts. So we randomized participants to have either water or non-nutritive sweetened drinks, so sweetened beverages, you know, diet drinks, essentially. And this is the first RCT with proper randomization to show sweetener consumption was associated with less weight regain compared to water. And what's interesting, when this came out, people hate sweeteners. People always have a problem there. It's the bad. It's all the industry being bad. They're going to get us. And no one's been able to say a problem with that trial because it was ran really, really well. And I'm not taking credit for all that because I did not do the really hard bit. I went, there's the analysis, done. But all the people here, there's a few other people who are on it. I think Scott's here. Yeah, all the people who went through this and put an incredible amount of work into this incredible trial. It's shown some really interesting results. And then on the back of this, I also was involved in SWEET. So this is a Horizon 2020 project run by Professor Joe Harold and Jason Halford. So this is a huge multi-center thing. I had one job, but it was a big job. And it's just my love of maps why I've included this. I ran this pan-European survey into attitudes and beliefs about sweeteners, 11,500 participants, 461 in each EU member state. And we looked at people's beliefs, the amount of sweeteners they consume, the beliefs about sugar, sweeteners, and so on, to try and understand what's motivating people's use, what are people's fears about sweeteners, people's fears about sugar, how it's related to the body mass, and so on. We've got this huge, huge data set that's so big, it's going to be a never-ending job for the next few years. But it makes I can do maps, and I love doing colourful maps. So, you know, this is just the different things we have on. So this is people's perceptions of the benefits of sweeteners. So you see the UK, Denmark in particular, Germany believe they're quite beneficial, whereas we get into Eastern Europe, people think they're less beneficial and so on. And then we see things for perceived risk around sweeteners and things like that. So there's a lot of risk against Southeastern Europe. People think they're quite risky. In the Netherlands, they don't think they're that risky at all. So we've got this really rich data set to understand, you know, what motivates use and so on. But to me, the most interesting thing, I missed this one as well, trust in regulators and desire for natural foods as well. Doesn't matter. For me, the most interesting thing is what the hell is up with Germany, Austria, and Greece? So we asked about sugar as well. So we say, do you think sugar causes type 2 diabetes? Everyone in Europe says, yeah. The Germans, the Austrians, and the Greeks say, nope. Do you think it causes tooth decay? We all know it does. Germans, Austria, and Greece, nope. Body weight, increases in body weight, yeah, you know, sugar, bad for you. No, doesn't do it. I was going to do that in the relative accents, but I thought better not. I can't do a Greek accent anyway. But, you know, I don't know what's going on there. To the point I went through and got a German person to check the translation of all this. Because, you know, it's just like, how's this happening? But actually, no, there's genuinely something really weird about Germany, Austria, and Greece. And if anyone's got any ideas, answers on a postcard, because I don't know. So, but one day we may find out. And then we did predict, and then there's other stuff that we've looked at, such as predicting people's sweeteners consumption. And this is the bit that interests me, but won't interest anyone in this room. So this is a multi-level, zero-inflated, negative binomial hurdle model. There's a visual representation. So what this is, it's quite an interesting thing, actually, when you look at sweetener consumption across Europe. Because you get, like, there's like two types of people. You've got one set of people, and it's basically avoid. There's people who will not consume sweeteners, these absolute avoiders, and they're like, they will not go anywhere near them. And then you've got people who consume sweeteners at different levels. Like, I'll consume sweeteners, not bothered, but I don't actively seek them out. Then you've got people like, they just drink these types of drinks. So to understand the data, and one of the things we have to do, and this is why knowing what you're doing with data is good, is that we have to understand that if we've got funny data like that, we can't just treat it like most people, not people like me. Most people, some people, they would just go, oh, just do a linear regression model, just predict how much people consume. So in fact, you've got to treat data carefully. You've got to treat data in the correct way. And the correct way is to go through a process to understand, okay, what's the suitable way of analyzing my data? So we had to develop a series of models, testing the most appropriate one until I got to my multi-level, zero-inflated, negative binomial hurdle model. Love saying that. There it is. And so we can look at what predicts it. And you start seeing these quite interesting results that come out. So the first bit is your count model. This is just people who consume sweeteners, ignoring the people who avoid at all costs. So it's associated with being male, greater acceptance of sweeteners, believing they have low risk, and believing they have a lot of benefit to you, which you'd expect. The avoiders, this is predicting whether people avoid sweeteners. So this is older people are more likely to be a complete and utter avoider of a sweetener. People with lower BMI are more likely to be avoiders. They're also less likely to be accepting. They believe they're beneficial, and they don't trust regulators at all. They have a really low trust in what the regulators say. So people say this, they're perfectly safe. They don't trust it. They don't trust it. So you've got these group of people who actually have a different set of beliefs and attitudes that causes their behavior. So it's quite important that when we do these sorts of models and we try and understand data, that we treat data correctly. And I can't tell you the amount of data I see analyzed in different papers and different presentations and so on at conferences that is not analyzed properly. And if you do not analyze it properly, you can't trust the results from it. Anyway, enough of ranting. Here we go, Emma. You've got a lot to be... You're at fault for a lot of this, Emma. Advertising. So as well, I've been a statistician on some of Emma's grants, looking at the effects of advertising on children and children's exposure to advertising. So there's, the cute Haribo advert where they've got, adults doing it because it gets around regulations. And there's your Happy Meal there because all the kids have a milk and apple with their Happy Meals, don't they? Well, that's how they get away with it. So this was looking at, so we've done some work recently, it's only very recently finished. Children's exposure to high-fat, sugar and salts, food and drink advertising, and brand advertising and things like that. So basically what we're trying to understand is how much of this type of food are children being exposed to over periods of time. Now, my job's really glamorous. So this involved me doing lots of fun things. Writing code for tax calculation. So if you ever want your taxes calculated, I can do it for you. You don't need an accountant. And this also gave me a huge hate of the Scottish Parliament. Their tax system is Byzantine. It's like, you can do that unless you were born on a full moon. Then you don't pay income tax until that year. However, if you earn more than that, it's this terrible system. So I had to write a tax calculator to work out net income. I also had to write a program. We had this data, which was every advert that had been on UK television on any channel you could possibly have for like a 2-month period, right? So I had to write this like program that scanned all those adverts, all those times and the channels, and based on people's self-reported when they watch TV, I had to go, okay, well, these are the adverts they're exposed to. And I could not get it to work. I couldn't, just would not work, it would not work. And you're looking at it and you're going, it just doesn't make any sense. But it was me being the idiot this. Because TV works on a 30-hour clock, apparently. And no one told me. So me and Emma were like, this doesn't make any sense. And then we went to the people who gave us the adverts, like, oh yeah, it's a 30-hour clock, telly. So do you think you could have told us? I spent 3 days writing a program to do this that was right. It's just we didn't realize TV's on a 30-hour clock. It was absolutely hellish. And then there was the day of multiple breakdowns dealing with the online data that we don't talk about anymore. But what did we find? So what did we find in this? Well, this is the exposure to adverts that we saw. So we've got overall food and beverage exposure, the number of products, number of brands, high fat, salt, sugar exposure, high fat, salt, sugar products, and high fat, salt, sugar brands. So this is what they were exposed to on the television. Audio, so this is what they're exposed to on podcasts or on the radio. This is the outdoor exposure, print media, in the cinema, and the total exposure. It's not bad, is it? Do you know what I mean? High fat, salt, sugar overall, about 18 exposures in a week. It's not bad, is it? That's your online data. 335. So this is basically, things are appearing on the screens all the time. They are getting exposed to this constantly. Sometimes it's advertising, sometimes it's product placement, etc., etc. And this is the problem. One of the problems we have is you can regulate TV, but then you go online and you get the Wild West, and you can see this absolutely huge level of exposure. Again, it was one of those things you've got to go back and check it to make sure it's right, because it's that big. But this was the huge amount. So there's just product placement. It's just stuff. So kids are watching YouTube all the time, and there's product placement. There's kids holding drinks. There's kids doing that, and they're getting constant exposure to these things. So by doing this work, we've seen these absolutely huge levels of exposure. To change subjects a little bit from advertising to terrorism, sex offenders and assault victims, and police interviews. Lawrence, this is for you. So over many years now, over 10 years it's been, I've been working with Lawrence Allison, Emily Allison, Michael Human, and Frankie Sermon-Baugh, looking at rapport-based interviewing. So this work has explored interviewing strategies that produce the most engagement and interview yield from a range of individuals. So we've looked at terrorists, sex offenders, and victims of crime who are doing ongoing work on informants. And like to make it clear, this work is based on real police interviews. Okay, so they've got like all the individuals, the terrorists, have all been convicted of terrorism offences, and there's real interviews that have been coded. Thank God, not by me, because it takes so long. Every 15 minutes, they get scored on all these different factors. So the earliest work we did on this was on terrorist detainees. And it's quite an interesting context on when this was done, because this was done in the sort of post-enhanced interrogation. If you remember enhanced interrogation and all that stuff came out, waterboarding and stuff like that. So Guantanamo Bay, and they were waterboarding to get information. Now, interestingly, that was supported by the American Psychological Association. So the official Psychological Association in America, they supported it. By these two guys, Bruce Jess and James Mitchell. Sorry, I should go the other way. And they were advocating torture. They were literally advocating, right, if you want to get information out of these people, like, you torture them, and this is how you torture them. We've worked out effective ways of torturing people. Things about torture, it doesn't work. The barbarous custom of whipping men suspected of having important secrets to reveal must be abolished. It has always been recognised that this method of interrogation by putting men to torture is useless. The wretches say whatever comes into their heads and whatever they think one wants to believe. That was said by notorious bleeding heart liberal Napoleon Bonaparte. We know it doesn't work. It's never worked. So the work the team has done on this has focused on rapport building. So interviews, getting information is not a punishment. It's a way of getting information. A police interview of a terrorist shouldn't be a punishment for the terrorist, right? They'll get punished by the courts down the line. What is a police interview? What's the point? To gain information. Whether it's to secure convictions or to get more information, especially if it's terrorism, if you can get information about different terrorist cells and so on, therefore, you can save lives, you can improve matters. So there's lots of different things that were ways they were measured. So they had all these interviews. Every 15 minutes, they were being scored on a range of different variables. Now, one of these things that was included was motivational interviewing. So this comes from the therapy literature. And using sort of motivational interviewing strategies like empathy, evocation, adaptation, autonomy, and acceptance. So using these certain strategies in order to build rapport and get a conversation going, because if they don't speak, you're not going to get any information out of them. So to try and get information. And then there's specific skills within that as well, things like reflective listening, rapport and resistance, using summaries, developing discrepancies. So if someone has a discrepancy in what they say, you develop that further, you talk to them about that further. That should seem very logical for a police interview. And then the other thing they scored was about interpersonal behaviours. So this is the interpersonal behaviour circle. I think this stuff was developed originally by Timothy Leary. And so this is just ways of interpersonal communication. So it's quite complicated, but it can be quite simplified in as much as we can have the sort of the T-Rex, the frank and forthright and unfriendly person, the lion, confident and demanding, a monkey, social, warm, friendly person, and a mouse, a modest, humble, and conflict-avoiding person. So you could be confrontational, authoritative, cooperative, or passive. And you can also do these things positively and negatively. So, you could be confident, assertive, and certain, but you could do the bad version of that would be judgmental, argumentative, and competitive. And all these interviews, every 15 minutes, for the detainee and the interviewer, was scored on all these things. So everything's getting scored. The databases are huge. And to try and explore how these things interact, how are people interacting with each other, and what works, what improves interaction, what improves the interpersonal relationship, and ultimately what produces what we call interview yield, useful information that we get. So we've got our T-Rex, lion, the monkey, and the mouse. And I just want to be clear that I wrote a randomizer program, and there's evidence of it. So I don't want to say, because Ems is far from the T-Rex, she's very lovely. Lawrence is not a mouse either, no, I don't think I'm a monkey, and Frankie is a lion. I think we both agreed on that, didn't we, Lawrence, earlier? So that's right. So I did write a randomizer for that, just evidence there. So this work, we've published lots of work on this over the years. Lots of work on counter-interrogation tactics, so trying to understand the different counter-interrogation tactics that are used by the different terrorist groups, so right-wing extremists, Al-Qaeda-inspired and paramilitary terrorists, how we can alter those behaviours, what can reduce these different counter-interrogation tactics, how opening interviews, how the start of an interview, how that impacts the later parts of the interview. This paper, When Tough Tactics Fail and Rapport Gets Results, was the first one we did, the first one we published, which is hugely cited and quite game-changing in the field, I think, because it was the first paper that actually came out and showed that these things work as successful in a real sample as well, not in people make-believing, pretending to be terrorists and so on. This is real people. We've moved on over the years. We've done similar things. We've applied this in motivation interviewing in child sexual abuse investigations. We've done it for the victims of assault as well. So where these motivational interviewing techniques, we can help actually get information out of the victims as well to try and help get more information to secure convictions as well. So I think one of the biggest ones we did as well was this one, the right to silence and permission to talk. Now this paper, this is the sort of model. Now they made us do the model like this, but I just want to make it clear because it's my stats talk. This is a gross oversimplification of what this was. Each one of those boxes is measured by lots of different things, not just one thing. And it's a multi-level model as well. It's very complicated. To the point of I used to have to run my computer and go home at the weekend for it to run and then come in and find out my computer had crashed and just get really angry and then ultimately buy a better computer. It was a fun experience, but we got there in the end. And it's important that this is where this is published, because this is published in the American Psychologist. The American Psychologist is the flagship journal of the American Psychological Association. It is their top journal, and it publishes just stuff they think is important. So from supporting torture, they've come around to publishing research on actually how we should do some things properly. So I think that's a general change. The other thing about this, though, is when you publish in the American Psychologist, they want a picture of you. Everyone gets a picture, right? So this is a black and white picture. I didn't get the memo about looking serious. So Everybody else has this sort of black and white Scandinavian noir picture. Not me. So to sort of demonstrate this, I've made my own Scandinavian noir opening sequence because, I've got plenty of spare time. So it's in Danish that. I won't say it, even though I should be, I am part Danish, but right to silence, permission to talk. I've done this, got music and everything. New cop. She's the new one. Just started. Serious. Lauren's been there a while, seen it all. Seen it all. Head of police. My God, she gets results. Yeah. So I just look like an idiot. As ever. But seriously, Phil Collins joke for Carl. This work has actually had a significant impact on law enforcement worldwide. We get a lot of funding, comes from the FBI. I actually went over to Washington a few years back now, in which we did a presentation on this, and we talked to people. So people work for different agencies in the US, and everyone I spoke to, knew about our work and had great belief in the work that we did as well. Everyone we spoke to. They were there and they said, yeah, what you said, what you talked about and the stuff we've heard, I feel that's what we should be doing. And they also acknowledge how bad it is, and particularly in the US, where they use the Reed technique for years. So if you've ever seen an American, true crime thing, the Reed technique is basically get someone in a room for a long, long time and hope they've got learning difficulties and get them to confess to something. And that's the Reed technique, basically. It's not a pleasant thing. So hopefully, I think the work that's come in here has actually moved the dial a bit. And it's still used. Lawrence and the team go out and they do training all around the world for people on interviewing as well. I've also, with a similar team, but including Simon Maskell, Hayley Rhodes, and Susan Giles as well. We've been in work on sex offenders for many years. I can't really talk about that in any great detail, but we've done arrest prioritization tools for sex offenders and for online offenders. We did win the University of Liverpool Impact of the Year for this. And as you can see there, this is many years ago now, but we had, with the result of our work, over 1,300 arrests, over 1,000 convictions and safeguarding more than 750 children. So that work, I can't talk about it in any detail, but we've had some really good impact, real positive impact on people's lives there. We also were nominated for a Times Higher Education Award for Research of the Year. Someone cured something and won it. This is all sewn up by the medics, isn't it? There's me in a tux. You know what you're thinking? It's between me and Idris Elba for the next James Bond. But I think the thing about this stuff as well, I got a lot of credit. You've got to give all the credit to Lawrence Allison, Emily Allison, Frankie Simbo, Hayley Rhodes, Michael Human, Sung Wan Kim, Sue Giles. All these people have actually done a huge amount of work. I just do the maths at the end. I just get a spreadsheet and go, this is how these numbers work together, and it spits out the thing at the end. I come in at the very end, basically. So they're the people who actually do all this hard work, and I have to deal with some pretty horrific things and learn about pretty horrific things, and I just see numbers on the spreadsheet. So yeah, they deserve all the credit for that. It's number 4, measurement. This is where we get statsy. But so I do that. I love working with people, and that's all I do, and it's basically analysing data for people, and that makes me happy. But there is something I sort of do a little bit for myself, and is I'm really interested in measurement, and that sounds really boring, doesn't it? But it's a thing that interests me. For loads of stuff, measurement is really easy. You got a diagnosis, you don't have a diagnosis. We can measure reaction times. We can measure calories people consumed. It's easy. But as soon as you want to measure something indirectly, whether it's people's beliefs, people's attitudes, people's attentional bias from there, all these different things, you've got to be really careful how you measure it. And this really matters. Now, I could do 10 two-hour lectures on why all this matters, okay, and do all the maths on it. But I'm going to show you one formula, because it sort of highlights these big problems. And that's the idea of reliability. So reliability of a measure is how well it measures the things it's meant to measure. How consistently does it measure the thing it's meant to measure, okay? And you can measure in loads of different ways, commonly with a thing called Cronbach's alpha. But there's better ways. But anyway, this formula matters, and this formula, most people don't think about this formula or know this formula, and it's not commonly taught. What this formula tells you is the observable association between two things. So I've got two measures, and I want to look at association between them. What you can possibly observe is limited by the reliability of those two measures. So what you can see is what the real association is, how those things in reality do correlate, times the square root of reliability A times reliability B. And what that means is as soon as your reliabilities of any measures are lower, it reduces your ability to be able to see associations between variables. And people don't think about that formula enough because they get measures with poor reliability and they use them in a study and then they don't find an association. You're not going to because your measure has low reliability. You can't identify associations. And this isn't considered enough. And I can give you a really simple example of this and how massively it impacts. So back to attentional bias, because I'll never stop kicking that. I'll never stop kicking my PhD. The reliability of measures of attentional bias has a Cronbach's alpha, this measure here, little alpha of 0.1. Okay. It ranges should from 0 to 1. 1's perfect. 0.7 seen as okay. 0.1 is shocking. You might as well be mashing your face into the keyboard to get your data. Okay? I'll program this lovely rainbowy graph. I did it in rainbows to try and keep people entertained because I'm talking real stats now. So this is the reliability of measure A and the reliability of measure B. So measure B is the different lines, okay? So let's say measure B is our measure of attentional bias, so it's this red line at the bottom. And let's say we've got another measure of craving with a reliability of 0.7, so that's acceptable. So the way this graph's designed is the correlation between A and B is 1. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. These two things should go up with each other in perfect step with each other. Okay? They should be exactly perfectly correlated. Like your height in centimeters and inches. They've got a perfect correlation with each other. That's what it should be. However, because if you've got to measure like our reliability of potential bias as 0.1, and the other one's got 0.7, which is kind of acceptable, even though their correlation should be 1, we can only observe a correlation of about 0.255. So these should be perfectly correlated, but we can't actually see that correlation at all. It's all masked. So if people write grants and they've got an outcome measure, which is something which we could measure reliability on it, you're shooting yourself in the foot unless that thing has really high reliability. As that reliability drops, it gets worse and worse and worse, and you can't see, you can't observe associations, you can't do predictions from these models. So over many, many years now, I've worked and I've made loads of scales, worked different measurements, different like questionnaire scales in order to measure things properly. Here's just a few examples here of measurements and development and validation of an addiction-like eating behavior scale. Exploring the munchies we did with Dr. Carl Roberts here. The effect of cannabis on food intake. People talk about the munchies all the time. No one's ever studied it. There's no research on it at all. So we actually made a scale that actually looks at that. What are the subjective effects of cannabis on appetite? Then recently I was asked to look at this scale, the IBD control. So this is the Irritable Bowel Disease Control Questionnaire about management of symptoms. So I worked on the stats of that in order to validate the scale that they've been using for years to make sure it's worked. We recently had that one published. And on the back of that, because it did a good job, I am now Crohn's and Colitis UK's statistician as well. So I do all different things of analyses for them. I do all their patient surveys, analyse that. So this is some recent work I did, and I hate this graph, but they wanted something like this, which compares the diagnosis times for the patients in 2019, which is the inner one, and the outer one, which is 2023. Now, this sort of graph, there was no code that existed for this. I had to develop this sort of thing myself, and I called it a pie in a donut graph. It's a really unsuitable name for, Crohn's and Colitis UK. It's a terrible name. I should have really thought about that one. But, that's in there, and I've wrote the annual report, and we've got tons of papers to come out with them over the years. I've also got PhD students who are all here, who are doing measurement stuff as well. So John is doing the Comprehensive Cannabis Motive Scale, which I'm saying is impressed because it's getting accepted. It's brilliant work. Georgiana's doing barriers to changes in alcohol use and cannabis use in non-dependent users. So we're actually trying to understand, before people get dependent on things, trying to identify, let's see if we can get an intervention at this point. Because once people are dependent on stuff, it's really, really hard to do anything about it. So trying to identify why people who just drink too much, for example, why aren't they thinking about changing their behavior? What are their barriers to doing something about their excessive drinking? And Sally is doing a care experience questionnaire. So this is a questionnaire for people who've been in care, under state care, and trying to understand how experiences of state care are associated with subsequent mental health in later life. So there's some really fantastic, important work that we've been doing over the years with that. I've also been working with a brilliant team. There they are, there. Oh, by the way, that team also bought me 4 bottles of wine for today. Appetite and addiction, nothing. So you can get me a drink later. Vicky, Sergio, Sean, Semra, Elizabeth, and Liv. I've been working on this stuff over the years, and this was the postpartum specific anxiety scale that Vicky developed in her PhD with Joe many years ago now. And this scale is a really, really important scale, and I'm going to come on to why it's particularly important in a minute when I kick the shit out of another scale. Ready, Sergio? So this is a scale, it's a valid and reliable measure of postpartum anxiety, and it's important, this type of stuff, because if you can't use a standard anxiety scale, in a new mother type scale. Do you feel tired all the time? Yeah. I didn't. I never gave birth, and I was tired all the time. So it's looking at very specific things, maternal competence, attachment anxieties, infant safety, welfare anxieties, practical infant care, and psychosocial adjustment to motherhood. And this scale, and it's brilliant because most people develop a scale that stops, but this just keeps going on, and it's getting developed, it's getting refined, they're making short forms, improving it, and we're validating it all around the world as well in different languages and so on. Because most scales, when they are validated in different countries, people do not do it properly. There's something called measurement and variance testing, and they don't do it. And if you don't do it, you can't use scales in different countries and trust the results. But people don't know that because no one's willing to put any time into learning statistics and psychometrics, but it is vitally, vitally important. And a good example of this is I sort of coming across the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale. Been used thousands of times. It's used in clinical care. It's used in clinical care as well. This scale is one of them brilliant things. Is right. Where the questions on that scale come from? Well, if you want to get some good questions for postnatal depression, who do you ask for the questions? What you want is a middle-aged man. He'll have the answers to it. And that's where that came from. A middle-aged man sat in a room, wrote a list of questions, and we're all going to use this scale forevermore. But we had tons of data on this. So I was like, can we have a look at this? And Sergio said, I don't know. And I gave him a heart attack after that, because that scale doesn't work. It doesn't measure what people think it measures. It performs differently in different countries, performs differently in different racial groups, performs differently prenatal and postnatally, and it's used in both. That scale does not work, and it is used all the time. It is frightening. But no one gives a damn about measurement, and that's the problem that we have. If people cared about this stuff, we'd have better measures, we'd have better outcomes, we'd have better care, and people should think about these things a lot more. And that's why I get really cross I get dead cross about things because it leads me to, like, this is my big bugbear, like, just stop doing it wrong. You know what I mean? I wouldn't, like, push my way in to a surgeon and go, what are you doing? I'll do that, and start digging away at people. But what we do see people doing stats who don't know what they're doing, writing papers. We see it all the time, and they shouldn't be, right? They've got an education in statistics from 20 years ago. Do you know what? The field moved on. It didn't just stop 20 years ago when you finished your undergrad degree after 10 hours of stats lectures. It didn't stop. It just keeps going. And this is really important. So I do a lot of work for EASO, and I do a lot of talks to early career researchers about good statistical practice, about how to do things right, how to consider things properly, things to look out for, things that you should avoid, and so on. And also, I've been lecturing statistics now here at Liverpool for almost 20 years. And when I started, lecturing stats used to be the job that was given to the new person. That's all it was. You used to turn up and you used to go, right, you're doing that. Oh, God, I've got to do stats. All right, well, you've got to end things. But I've just been doing it for years because I love it. And I think it's really important. And it's it's the only thing, not the only thing I enjoy. The only thing I enjoy research-wise is just stats and methods. And, because of this, I've developed a decent reputation in stats, along with Dr. Andrew Jones. We've written our book for Sage, A Practical Guide to Data Analysis, using our IBM SPSS statistics. So it's got our unique approach to that, and it'll get published this year. If Sage can bother formatting it at any time, honestly, oh my God. Can you do it like this? Yeah, there you go. Oh, can you do it the other way? All right, there you go. Oh, can you do it the way you did it first? And that's been going on for a year now. They're an absolute nightmare. I've made videos for them on psychometrics as well. I make online resources on data integrity for postgraduate and early career researchers as well, so not for undergrads. For beyond that, I've been asked to do the introduction to quantitative methods for Taylor Francis as well. And I also think knowledge should be free, though. So that's why I've got a YouTube channel with loads of videos, over 1 million views, but that's not why I've included this here. More because it allows me, as you've seen today, I'm dead good at Photoshop. And Sage rejected a lot of my Photoshops. Apparently they're inappropriate or called copyright problems. So that's me photoshopped as Paulie Walnuts in The Sopranos. And that is Sam Allardyce, former England manager Sam Allardyce, as King of the North in Game of Thrones. Apparently I wasn't allowed to include that. As you can see, it's pretty slick and definitely doesn't look flaky at all. So that's it. I've got some acknowledgements. You can tell I've done 5 hours of lectures today before I did this. I'm knackered. The people, so I've mentioned loads of people specifically. You're not getting another one because I haven't got the space. But these are some other people I just want to say thanks to as well. Who I've worked with over the years on a huge range of projects from all over the world. Some of them are here tonight, some of them can't be here tonight, and so on. Some little extra ones as well. If anyone ever knew, back in the day, used to have Ben Dog used to come into work with me, and everyone loved Ben Dog. He was like he was the best member of our department. I don't think anyone will argue with that. I've currently got Bill the Dog, not Bill Dog, Bill the Dog is separate. Jürgen Klopp, he's getting thanks as well. Most important acknowledgements I've got is my parents, John and Kathy, who are there today. Wouldn't be standing here or anywhere near here without them. I couldn't have better parents, honestly. Even though I'm 42 years old, I still have the best parents in the world. They are absolutely fantastic, and they've been nothing but loving and supporting my entire life. Nick, my wife here, is just the best person. She's always been there for me. We kept you alive this year, didn't we, Nick? We're still going. Ivy and Molly, my 2 little kids there, who are absolutely lovely 99% of the time. Not when Molly walks in at 5 o'clock in the morning the other day and just shouted, "Dad's never been on a bus." That's my life. Yeah, and so that's that. And go on, Carl, you can have another one as well, mate. All right. So I hope that wasn't too boring for you. I know I spoke quick and went through a lot and probably swore too much for an inaugural lecture. but that's just how I do things. And thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate you all spending the time to come here and see me. Thank you.